At 100 years old, June Lockhart, the beloved actor from TV's Lassie and Lost in Space, took her final bow in Santa Monica. Yet her warmth, grace, and enduring image as America's mother continue to echo through generations raised on loyalty, love, and the dream of reaching the stars. The story of June Lockhart begins not in an ordinary nursery, but in the faint shimmer of studio lights that never seem to dim around her. Born on June 25, 1925, in New York City, her destiny was written long before she took her first bow. She entered a world where art was a family language, where curtain calls replaced lullabies, and where storytelling was a daily ritual. Her parents, Jean and Kathleen Lockhart, were both celebrated actors of the stage and screen. Jean Lockhart, a man of refined wit and soft-spoken warmth, would later be remembered as the kindly judge in Miracle on 34th Street, the very embodiment of fairness and compassion. Kathleen Lockhart, a luminous actress in her own right, carried an elegance that seemed to make every room brighter. Together, they were pillars of a theatrical dynasty, and their daughter would soon become its brightest light. From the beginning, June's world was filled with the hum of creative energy. The smell of grease paint, the distant murmur of stage crews setting scenes, the echo of applause. All of it became as familiar to her as the sounds of traffic outside their Manhattan home. She did not simply visit her parents' world, she grew up inside it. Imagine being a child whose playground was a backstage corridor, whose bedtime stories were lines from plays, and whose lullabies came from rehearsals echoing through the walls. That was June's upbringing. To the outside world, it might have seemed an unusual childhood, but to her it was home. A place where creativity and discipline danced hand in hand. Her parents did not push her toward the spotlight. In fact, they hoped she would find her own path. But the young June absorbed their craft naturally, as if acting were woven into her DNA. She learned early how to listen, not just to words but to emotions. "My parents were my teachers long before I ever stepped into a classroom," she would later say. The Lockhart household was one of affection and quiet sophistication. When her father wasn't performing, he was writing or composing. A man of endless curiosity who believed that art was a mirror to the soul. Kathleen, meanwhile, balanced her stage career with motherhood, offering June both nurturing warmth and the example of a strong, independent woman in an era when such models were rare. By the age of 10, June was already drawn to performance. She watched rehearsals, memorized monologues, and mimicked her parents' lines for fun. The adults who visited the Lockhart home, playwrights, musicians, and actors, often marveled at the little girl who could recite Shakespeare with flawless diction and startling emotion. She was not a prodigy in the calculated sense, but rather a natural artist in formation. In 1938, when June was just 12 years old, opportunity came knocking in the most poetic way imaginable. Her parents had been cast together in a new adaptation of A Christmas Carol. When a small part opened up for a young girl, director Edwin Elmer Rinn thought of June. And so she stepped in, not as a favor to her parents, but because she genuinely fit the role. Standing beside Jean and Kathleen under the studio lights, June Lockhart made her film debut. It was a modest part, but her presence was unmistakable. There was something natural and calm about her, a quiet grace that seemed older than her years. The experience left a deep impression. Watching her parents deliver their lines, she saw the artistry behind performance, how emotion was shaped by subtle gestures, how silence could speak louder than dialogue. The camera, she realized, was not an enemy to fear but an ally that magnified truth. Critics barely noticed the child actress at the time, but those who worked with her did. One cinematographer reportedly remarked, "That girl understands light better than half the grown-ups I know." He was right. Even then, June had an intuitive sense of presence, a gift that could not be taught. The 1940s were a decade of transition for both the world and for June Lockhart. America was entering the Second World War. Hollywood was becoming both a source of escape and a voice of national morale. Young actors emerged as symbols of resilience, glamour, and hope. For June, now entering her late teens, Hollywood represented both opportunity and responsibility. Unlike many starlets of her generation, she did not arrive chasing fame. She arrived carrying legacy. Studios quickly took notice of her poise, her articulate speech, and the unforced warmth that radiated from her performances. She appeared in a series of films that showcased her versatility. One of her early notable roles was in Meet Me in St. Louis 1944, the musical masterpiece that starred Judy Garland. Although her part was small, she became part of a cinematic moment that defined an era. The film's nostalgic heart and radiant technicolor beauty mirrored the very qualities people would later associate with June herself: sincerity, grace, and quiet strength. Around the same time, she took on a very different challenge: the atmospheric horror film She-Wolf of London, 1946. As the lead, June demonstrated her ability to balance vulnerability with resolve, portraying a young woman caught between fear and self-discovery. Critics noted her ability to anchor even the most fantastical material in emotional truth. Unlike many of her contemporaries, she refused to let Hollywood dictate her image. She was elegant, yes, but never ostentatious. While gossip magazines obsessed over scandalous romances and reckless parties, June carried herself with quiet dignity. She knew that the attention of the moment was fleeting, but the work, the art, would last. In an industry often fueled by spectacle, she became known for restraint. She wasn't the loudest star in the room, but she didn't need to be. Her performances spoke for her. The post-war years brought both challenges and choices. Hollywood was shifting, television was on the horizon, and actors were redefining their roles in society. Many who had grown up in the studio system found themselves typecast or discarded. June, however, refused to be limited. She had inherited her father's intellectual curiosity and her mother's passion for the stage. Rather than rely solely on film roles, she turned to the theater. A move that many saw as risky, but one that would soon prove her brilliance. Broadway in the late 1940s was electric, a world of living drama where performances were raw, immediate, and deeply human. For an actress like June Lockhart, it was both a challenge and a homecoming. She embraced the discipline of live theater where every line mattered and every night brought a new audience. In 1948, June landed the role that would define her early career. For Love or Money, a witty, sophisticated comedy about ambition and desire. On paper, it was a clever play. On stage, it became a showcase for June's remarkable range. Audiences fell in love with her. Critics praised her timing, her confidence, and the sincerity that made her character more than just a charming archetype. The New York Times described her performance as radiant and commanding, a young actress of astonishing depth and grace. That same year, she was awarded the Tony Award for Outstanding Performance, an achievement that cemented her status not just as a movie ingenue, but as a serious artist. For June, the honor meant more than applause. It was validation that she had stepped out from her parents' shadow. Her success on Broadway proved that talent was not merely inherited. It was cultivated, refined, and earned. When she took the stage to accept her award, she spoke briefly but powerfully. "I share this not only with my family, but with every young actor who believes that the work matters more than the fame." It was a philosophy that would guide her for decades to come. As the 1950s approached, Hollywood itself was undergoing a transformation. The golden age of the studio system was fading, and television was beginning to reshape the entertainment landscape. For many actors, the shift was disorienting. But June Lockhart adapted with elegance. She had learned early that longevity came from authenticity, from saying yes to challenges that deepened one's craft rather than merely expanded one's fame. Those who knew her during this time often spoke of her composure. She was approachable, articulate, and fiercely professional. There were no public feuds, no scandals, no reckless behavior to tarnish her image. Instead, she cultivated a reputation as one of Hollywood's most dependable and gracious figures. Directors loved working with her because she brought intelligence to every role. Crew members admired her humility, and audiences, especially young women, saw in her a figure who embodied dignity in an industry that often demanded compromise. By the end of the 1940s, June Lockhart had already lived a story many could only dream of. A childhood surrounded by legends, a film debut beside her parents, a graceful transition into Hollywood's spotlight, and a triumphant rise to Broadway stardom. Yet she was only in her 20s. Her early years formed the foundation of a career that would span generations. The qualities that defined her, kindness, integrity, intelligence, were not just traits but tools she would wield to shape an enduring legacy. Looking back, it's easy to see how those early chapters foreshadowed what was to come. Her iconic television roles in Lassie and Lost in Space, her continued work into the modern era, and her lifelong devotion to the performing arts. But even before all of that, the essence of June Lockhart was already clear. A performer guided by artistry, not ego. There is something almost timeless about June Lockhart's early story. It belongs to a Hollywood that no longer exists, a world of celluloid dreams and orchestra overtures, yet it feels remarkably alive even today. She grew up in a household where love and artistry were inseparable, where storytelling was treated as a sacred craft. From her first steps on a film set to her triumphant bow on Broadway, June Lockhart embodied a rare truth: that greatness doesn't shout, it whispers, and those who listen closely will never forget it. In the quiet glow of that truth, her legacy was born, and though the decades have turned, that same glow still shines. Steady, graceful, eternal. The 1950s were a time of profound transformation in American life. The nation was booming. Suburban lawns, chrome-trimmed cars, and the soft hum of optimism filled the air. Families were buying their first televisions, and with them came a new kind of intimacy between stars and audiences. No longer were actors distant figures on massive cinema screens, they now appeared right in the living room, week after week, almost as family. In this new medium, authenticity mattered more than glamour. Viewers craved warmth, connection, and truth. And in that new world, June Lockhart found her perfect home. By the middle of the decade, she was already a respected actress. Intelligent, disciplined, and graceful. But in 1958, her life and the image of the American mother would change forever when she joined one of television's most beloved series, Lassie. When Lassie first aired in 1954, it was more than a family show. It was a moral compass for post-war America. Each episode told a story of loyalty, courage, and the quiet heroism of everyday life, anchored by the friendship between a boy and his dog. By the time June joined the cast as Ruth Martin, the series was already a phenomenon. Her arrival came during a delicate transition. Cloris Leachman, who had played the mother, was leaving the show, and producers needed someone who could step into the role seamlessly. Someone who embodied kindness, stability, and quiet authority. June Lockhart was a natural choice. From her very first appearance, audiences felt something deeply reassuring in her presence. Her portrayal of Ruth Martin wasn't exaggerated or overly sentimental. Instead, it carried a rare truthfulness, a balance between warmth and resolve that reflected the ideals of parenthood itself. She spoke softly but firmly, guided her children and sometimes even Lassie with patience, and always seemed to find wisdom in simplicity. Television critics often described her as the perfect mother, but to June, the role was more than just an archetype. It was a mission. "I didn't just play a mother," she once said. "I felt like one to all those children watching." And indeed, millions of young viewers saw her that way. For children growing up in a world that sometimes felt uncertain, amid Cold War fears, shifting gender roles, and the rapid pace of change, June Lockhart's Ruth Martin represented safety. She was the voice that soothed, the presence that comforted, and the embodiment of unconditional love. There was a particular tenderness in Lassie that transcended its simple plots. It wasn't just a story about a clever collie rescuing people from wells or fires. It was a meditation on family, trust, and the quiet strength of everyday goodness. Every week, audiences saw Ruth Martin tending to her family's farm, caring for her son Timmy, played by John Provost, and offering guidance that resonated across generations. Behind the scenes, the bond between June and her young co-star mirrored that of their characters. John Provost later recalled that June wasn't just an actress playing a mom. She was one. "She looked out for me, taught me professionalism, and treated everyone with respect." Her influence reached beyond the set. Children who watched the show often wrote her letters, confiding in her as if she were their own mother. She read as many as she could and responded whenever possible, always signing off with kindness. In interviews, June often reflected on this unexpected responsibility. "Television brings you into people's homes," she said. "That's an extraordinary privilege and a very real relationship. You can't fake warmth. Kids know when you mean it." For millions, Lassie wasn't merely entertainment. It was a reflection of who they aspired to be. In an era when families were redefining themselves, June Lockhart became the face of maternal love. Firm but gentle, wise but approachable. Despite the show's wholesome image, the production of Lassie was anything but simple. The collie, or rather the several collies who played Lassie, required careful direction and endless patience. Scenes often took hours to capture as the canine star's handlers coaxed the perfect performance. June, ever the professional, handled the chaos with grace. She became known for her ability to maintain composure through long days of filming, unpredictable weather, and the constant presence of animals on set. Her background in both film and theater had taught her discipline, and that discipline became the backbone of her television success. She often arrived early, learning not only her lines but everyone else's. "If I know the rhythm of a scene, I can help make it better," she once explained. Her attention to detail and deep respect for the crew made her beloved among everyone she worked with. And yet she never let fame distort her sense of self. While her peers were swept up in Hollywood's social whirl, June preferred quiet evenings at home or charitable events where she could lend her presence to good causes. Fame, she believed, was an opportunity to uplift others, not a tool for vanity. By 1964, Lassie had become an American institution, and June Lockhart had spent 6 years as its matriarch. But as the series evolved, so too did June's creative ambitions. She began to feel that her time on the show, as fulfilling as it had been, had reached its natural conclusion. Leaving Lassie was not an easy decision. She knew she was stepping away from one of television's most beloved roles, but she also sensed the winds of change blowing through both her career and the country itself. The 1960s were dawning, and with them came a new sense of possibility. Technology was advancing, social movements were stirring, and the imagination of the world was turning upward, toward the stars. And for June Lockhart, that shift would soon take on a literal form. In 1965, television entered the space age. America was captivated by NASA's achievements, and science fiction became a mirror for the nation's dreams and fears. It was a time of rockets, moon missions, and questions about humanity's place in the universe. That same year, June Lockhart accepted a role that could not have been more different from the earthbound calm of Lassie. She would play Maureen Robinson, the intelligent, compassionate mother in Lost in Space. If Lassie had made her the nation's favorite mom, Lost in Space made her the mother of the future. The premise was daring for its time. A family of explorers stranded among the stars after their spaceship veered off course. Part adventure, part allegory, Lost in Space captured both the optimism and the anxiety of the space age. June's Maureen Robinson was not a passive figure. She was a scientist, a thinker, and a woman whose intellect matched her empathy. While her husband John, played by Guy Williams, led the family through perilous encounters, Maureen served as the emotional and moral compass. It was, in many ways, a continuation of what June had always brought to her work, the idea that strength and compassion were not opposites but partners. "I wanted Maureen to be the kind of woman who could run a household or a spaceship," she joked in one interview, and sometimes both in the same day. Critics quickly recognized the quiet power of her portrayal. At a time when female characters in science fiction were often decorative or secondary, June's performance stood out. She wasn't a damsel in distress, she was a partner in discovery. For young girls watching in the 1960s, Maureen Robinson offered a vision of possibility. A woman who could be nurturing without being confined, scientific without being cold, and strong without ever losing her humanity. Through the late 1960s, Lost in Space became a cultural touchstone. Its bright colors, imaginative sets, and mix of adventure and humor made it both campy and endearing. But beyond the robots and aliens, what grounded the show was its heart, the sense of family amid the chaos of the unknown. And at the center of that heart was June Lockhart. Behind the scenes, she approached the show with the same professionalism she had brought to every project. She memorized complex technical dialogue, embraced the futuristic setting, and often helped younger cast members navigate the pressures of fame. In public appearances, she became an unofficial ambassador for the optimism of the space age. She visited science fairs, appeared at NASA events, and encouraged children, especially young girls, to pursue education in science and the arts. When asked years later about her connection to the show, she said, "I've always believed in exploring, whether it's the mind, the heart, or the universe. Lost in Space was a fantasy, yes, but it spoke to something real, the idea that families and humanity itself can face the unknown together." By the time Lost in Space ended in 1968, June Lockhart had achieved something rare. She had become a symbol across generations. First, she was the comforting mother of the 1950s, then she was the pioneering mother of the space age. In both roles, she gave audiences a reflection of who they were and who they wanted to be. But her influence extended far beyond television. She remained active in theater, guest-starred in numerous series, and lent her voice to causes promoting education, environmental awareness, and animal welfare. Colleagues often described her as one of the kindest people in the industry. "June was the definition of grace," said John Provost in later years. "She carried herself with a calm that made everyone else better." Even as the entertainment world changed, moving into the grittier realism of the 1970s, June Lockhart retained her timeless aura. She was a reminder of television's golden promise that stories could heal, inspire, and unite. It is easy, in hindsight, to see June Lockhart's journey from Lassie to Lost in Space as symbolic of America's evolution during those decades, from the comforting certainties of home to the exhilarating uncertainty of discovery. Through it all, her performances remained grounded in one essential truth: humanity. She once reflected, "What I loved most about acting wasn't pretending to be someone else. It was revealing what's real in all of us." That authenticity became her hallmark. She never relied on controversy or spectacle to stay relevant. She relied on empathy, discipline, and grace. And in doing so, she became more than an actress. She became a touchstone. When television historians look back on the 20th century, few figures embody its evolution as fully as June Lockhart. From the flickering black and white simplicity of Lassie to the dazzling technicolor cosmos of Lost in Space, she bridged eras, genres, and generations. Her performances were never about perfection. They were about presence. Whether she was comforting a child, calming a frightened dog, or gazing out into the unknown stars, she brought the same sincerity that had defined her from the very beginning. To this day, fans who grew up watching her still speak of her as though she were family, and perhaps, in a way, she always will be. In the story of American television, June Lockhart is not merely a chapter. She is a heartbeat. The quiet pulse that reminded us that even in the vastness of space or the simplicity of a small farm, what truly matters is love, courage, and the strength to care. By 1965, June Lockhart had already conquered the stage and screen. She had been America's mother on Lassie, Broadway's darling, and Hollywood's symbol of grace. But the world was changing, and so was the horizon of storytelling. Humanity's eyes were turning skyward, watching rockets pierce the atmosphere and astronauts walk among the stars. It was the dawn of the space age, and television, always a mirror of society's dreams, began to imagine what life might look like out there. For June Lockhart, the timing could not have been more perfect. That year, she accepted a role that would take her, and an entire generation of viewers, to the farthest reaches of imagination. Clad in a silvery spacesuit and standing beneath futuristic lights, she became Maureen Robinson, the brilliant biochemist, mother, and emotional compass of the Jupiter 2 in Lost in Space. From the moment she appeared on screen, it was clear June Lockhart had once again found her natural orbit. Lost in Space was the brainchild of producer Irwin Allen, known for his flair for spectacle. He envisioned a family of space pioneers who, while venturing into the unknown, would face not just external dangers, but the timeless struggles of unity, courage, and faith. It was 1965, 4 years before humans would walk on the moon, and American households were filled with both excitement and anxiety about the future. The Cold War loomed large, but so did the promise of discovery. The nation needed a story that could transform fear into wonder. Enter June Lockhart. As Maureen Robinson, she wasn't merely a supporting character. She was the emotional gravity that held the entire series together. Her husband, John Robinson, played by Guy Williams, was the noble explorer. Their children, Judy, Penny, and Will, represented the next generation of curiosity. And then there was Dr. Smith, the scheming stowaway whose antics often plunged the family into chaos. But amid the mayhem, alien worlds, cosmic storms, and talking robots, June Lockhart gave the show its soul. Her Maureen was not a 1960s stereotype of domesticity. She was a scientist, a thinker, and an equal partner in exploration. Even when the scripts leaned into absurdity, she treated every line with sincerity. Her calm voice could turn technobabble into poetry. Her steady gaze could make even a planet of foam rocks feel real. The genius of June Lockhart's performance was subtle. In an era when female roles in science fiction were often decorative, she brought intelligence and emotional depth. While others might have played Maureen as the passive wife of a space captain, Lockhart insisted on portraying her as intellectually engaged, someone who analyzed data, repaired equipment, and debated the mission's direction. At the same time, she understood the show's heart, family. Whenever young Will Robinson, played by Billy Mumy, faced danger, Maureen's instinctive protection became the heartbeat of the story. Her empathy for her children, her quiet strength beside her husband, and her endless patience with Dr. Smith grounded the show's most chaotic moments. Angela Cartwright, who played Penny, once recalled, "June was like our real mother in space. Between takes, she'd check that we were eating enough, that we were warm, that we understood our lines. She carried that same care off-screen." That natural maternal presence became one of Lost in Space's greatest gifts. Even as the series slipped from serious sci-fi to whimsical adventure, June Lockhart remained its constant. The one figure who reminded audiences that the Robinsons' survival wasn't just about rockets and robots, but about love, compassion, and unity. The tone of Lost in Space famously evolved during its 3-season run. The first season carried an air of gravity, stark lighting, tense narratives, and moral questions about survival and progress. But as ratings pressures mounted and audiences sought escapism over realism, the series gradually embraced its colorful, campy side. Suddenly, the Robinsons were facing bubble-headed aliens, musical plants, and cosmic tricksters. The stories became more playful and occasionally ridiculous, but if anyone could weather that tonal shift, it was June Lockhart. She never condescended to the material. Instead, she played every scene with conviction, finding sincerity even in the absurd. And then came the episode that would go down in television legend, The Great Vegetable Rebellion. In that surreal hour of television history, the Robinsons found themselves battling a sentient carrot. Yes, a carrot, determined to transform them all into plants. The premise was absurd even by 1960s standards. During filming, the cast could barely contain their laughter. June later recounted the memory with delight. "We laughed so hard we had to do take after take," she said. "It was impossible to get through it without cracking up." Irwin Allen was furious. He told us we'd ruined the episode, and as punishment he wrote us out of the next 2. Her laughter, however, was affectionate, not mocking. She knew that Lost in Space had crossed from science fiction into something else, a kind of televised fantasy that lived halfway between comedy and adventure. And she understood something profound. that audiences didn't just tune in for scientific realism. They tuned in because they loved the Robinsons. Even at its silliest, the show offered something pure. An escape, a dream, a place where family always found a way home. When Lost in Space ended its run in 1968, it left behind a cultural footprint that few could have anticipated. At the time, critics dismissed it as lightweight entertainment compared to the more cerebral Star Trek. But time, as it often does, proved them wrong. Decades later, as astronauts prepared to launch from Cape Kennedy or orbit the Earth aboard the space shuttle, many cited Lost in Space as part of their inspiration. The sight of a family, complete with children, parents, and a talking robot, venturing boldly into the unknown had sparked something in their imagination. June Lockhart herself became a beloved guest at NASA events, science conventions, and space-themed celebrations. "When I visit NASA," she said proudly, "they treat me like a duchess." She meant it literally. Engineers and astronauts alike would line up for autographs, thanking her for the hope she had inspired. Some even told her that seeing Maureen Robinson on television made them believe that science and compassion could coexist. That exploration didn't have to mean abandoning humanity. For June, these encounters were deeply moving. "When a grown astronaut tells you that your show helped him choose his path," she once said, "you realize that storytelling has power far beyond entertainment." Off-screen, June Lockhart remained remarkably grounded. Her fame never inflated her ego. She continued to study, to read voraciously, and to stay curious about the world. She often spoke about the parallels between her Lost in Space character and her own beliefs. "I always thought of Maureen as someone who balanced heart and intellect," she explained. "That's what I try to do in life, to stay curious, to keep learning, but to never lose kindness." Those who worked with her often remarked on her warmth. Billy Mumy described her as radiant, like sunlight in human form. Angela Cartwright said she had this ability to make everyone feel seen. Even in later interviews, Lockhart's wit sparkled. When asked how she managed to look so youthful and poised through years of filming under hot studio lights, she laughed, "Well, outer space has wonderful lighting." She carried herself with a blend of sophistication and humor that made her instantly likable, a quality that audiences sensed instinctively, even through the television screen. What made June Lockhart's Maureen Robinson truly remarkable was how she subtly challenged cultural expectations. The mid-1960s were still a time when most female TV characters were defined by domesticity. Yet Maureen was portrayed as a scientist, a partner, and a voice of reason in an environment that demanded intellect and courage. Without speeches or fanfare, June's portrayal helped shift perceptions of what women could represent on television. She wasn't there to serve coffee or faint at the first sign of danger. She was there to interpret data, manage crises, and remind everyone, from her husband to the robot, that empathy was as important as logic. This balance of strength and warmth resonated deeply, particularly with young girls watching from their living rooms. Many who grew up with Lost in Space would later say that Maureen Robinson showed them that science wasn't just for men. It was for anyone curious enough to dream. In that sense, June Lockhart became not only a performer but a quiet trailblazer, one whose influence rippled far beyond television. When Lost in Space concluded, June faced the same challenge that many television icons encounter: how to evolve beyond an era-defining role. But her curiosity and professionalism never wavered. She continued to appear in television and film, from guest spots on Perry Mason and Adam 12 to roles in General Hospital and Grey's Anatomy decades later. Her voice, too, became a recognizable comfort, appearing in narrations, commercials, and public service campaigns. To generations who grew up with her, hearing June Lockhart speak was like hearing the sound of reassurance itself. Yet she always looked back on Lost in Space with affection. She kept in touch with her castmates, attended fan conventions, and often reminisced about the show's unique magic. "We didn't realize we were making history," she once said. "We were just a family trying to get home, and maybe that's why people loved us." The legacy of Lost in Space refused to fade. Its reruns introduced new audiences to the adventures of the Robinson family, while its imagery, the silver suits, the bubble-headed robot, the eerie alien landscapes, became part of pop culture itself. When Netflix launched its modern reimagining of Lost in Space in 2018, fans rejoiced to see June Lockhart honored in a cameo appearance. She played a distinguished elder stateswoman, symbolically passing the torch to a new generation. For longtime admirers, her presence was more than nostalgia. It was a living reminder that she was and is the heart of the franchise. As she walked onto the new set, surrounded by futuristic technology that had once been mere imagination, she smiled. "It feels like coming home," she said softly. Looking back, June Lockhart's career can be read like a map of 20th-century American entertainment. She began in the black-and-white innocence of the 1930s, matured through Hollywood's golden age, and then helped shape television as it came of age. Few performers have navigated so many eras while remaining true to themselves. Her secret: adaptability without compromise. Whether in period costume, farm apron, or spacesuit, she radiated the same essential humanity. Calm, wise, and endlessly compassionate, she never chased trends, she simply was. For June, acting was never about escape from reality but a way to illuminate it. "We tell stories," she said, "to remind people that there's hope, that no matter how far you travel, you're never really alone." That philosophy made her performances timeless. Even today, streaming platforms and classic television networks continue to introduce her to new generations, and inevitably, someone watching will see in her what millions once did: the reassuring presence of a woman who seems to understand everything that matters. There's a beautiful symmetry in June Lockhart's journey. She began her career as a child standing beside her parents in A Christmas Carol, a story about redemption and human warmth. And decades later, she found herself guiding a fictional family through the cold expanse of space, still carrying that same warmth. Her career at its heart has always been about connection. Between generations, between art and audience, between the known and the unknown. In an industry that often prizes reinvention, June Lockhart has remained a constant, the embodiment of grace, empathy, and resilience. She has inspired astronauts and actors alike, proving that the power of kindness extends beyond the limits of time and gravity. When she walks into NASA's halls and they treat her like a duchess, it isn't out of nostalgia, it's out of reverence. Because through her, an entire generation learned that space exploration wasn't just about rockets and stars, but about courage, family, and the human heart. And so, somewhere between Earth and eternity, there shines a quiet, steadfast light. The legacy of June Lockhart, who taught us that even in the farthest corners of the universe, love remains the most powerful force of all. Among her co-stars, June shared a rare bond with Guy Williams, the dashing actor who played her on-screen husband. Together, they created one of television's most enduring partnerships, calm authority balanced with human warmth. Off-screen, their friendship mirrored the tenderness they portrayed. They shared a deep respect for the craft, often staying after hours to refine scenes or simply laugh about the day's chaos. When the cameras stopped rolling, their camaraderie continued through letters and reunions. After Williams' passing in 1989, Lockhart spoke softly of him. "Guy had that rare blend of charm and decency. He was a true gentleman, the kind you don't often find anymore." For her, Lost in Space had never just been about science fiction. It was about family, one built in the stars yet deeply human. After Lost in Space, June Lockhart refused to fade into nostalgia. She played a doctor in Petticoat Junction, took roles in General Hospital, and even appeared in the 1998 Lost in Space film, a loving nod to the series that defined her. She was also a passionate space enthusiast, frequently attending NASA launches and befriending astronauts. Her curiosity and optimism made her a beloved guest at science events, where she symbolized the bridge between fiction and the frontier of reality. Even presidents took note. During Ronald Reagan's time in office, he reminisced with her about a film he had made with her father, apologizing, half laughing, for once smashing a chocolate-covered tomato in his face. It was a small but poignant reminder. June Lockhart's life had brushed against nearly every corner of 20th century culture. When she passed away peacefully in her Santa Monica home at the age of 100, the news rippled with both sadness and celebration. Few actors could claim to have shaped the moral imagination of two generations, from Lassie's rural kindness to Lost in Space's futuristic wonder. June Lockhart's career wasn't built on spectacle or scandal, but on sincerity. She played mothers, yes, but each one carried the quiet courage of a woman who believed in goodness, in family, in the power of nurturing dreams. Her legacy continues every time a young scientist recalls how Lost in Space stirred their curiosity, every time an old rerun of Lassie reminds someone of the comfort of home, and every time an actor learns that grace can be stronger than fame. As one NASA engineer once told her, "You made space feel like home." And that, more than any award or headline, is how June Lockhart will be remembered. A mother of imagination, a pioneer of hearts, a star who never truly left the sky.